We're all fascinated by police shows, by detectives solving murders on television. But what's it really like? Well, Hank Idsinga was in the Toronto Police Service for 34 years. He spent 18 years in the Homicide Division, 5 years heading up the country's largest homicide police service. So what is it like? That's part of what he discusses in his new book, The High Road: Confessions of a Homicide Cop. But he also talks about personal reasons for why he ended up in the police service, his experience with antisemitism within the Toronto Police Service, and pulls back the curtain on the politics behind all of it. We sat down to chat with Hank Idsinga. Here's our discussion. Hank, after more than 30 years as a police officer, I know you've been retired for a couple of years now, but 30 years as a police officer, so many covering homicide. Is there one case that you worked on, murder or otherwise, that still haunts you, keeps you up at night, bothers you?
I had a case, and I really can't talk too much about specifics of the case, but I had a case very early on in homicide that we worked really hard on for months and months on end. And we laid charges, and we had multiple trials, and at the end of the day, our accused was acquitted. And I still think about that one, I think, more than any others. But the nice thing about 34 years in policing, I still have a lot of great memories of cases back in 14 Division in my uniform days as well. In the major crime unit, in uniform, working there. Those are some of the best times. And a lot of those cases really never come to light because they're not as sexy and interesting as the homicide cases in the public eye.
Well, I mean, homicide cases, that takes up an awful lot of time in our entertainment world. Think of all the movies, the cop shows. We all watch Law and Order. We even watch Law and Order Toronto, which isn't really realistic because people get convicted as opposed to just given bail over and over again. Sorry, that's my joke about our justice system. But, how different is it between what we see on TV and what you dealt with? What does the public misunderstand or not get about homicide investigations because we've been misinformed from watching too much CSI?
CSI, which obviously is complete fiction, very loosely based on real cases that they've taken and massaged into a drama series. Law and Order, a little more true to actual cases, but no homicide obviously gets solved in 45 minutes.
Really?
It's 20 minutes and then 20 minutes for the court process, right? I mean, these things take place over years, sometimes, usually months and months, before you can even lay a charge. And then, of course, doing the investigation and making that arrest and laying that charge, if you've been fortunate enough to get to a point where you can gather enough evidence to lay that charge, is 1/3 of the process. You've still got your preliminary inquiry, which happens in 90% of homicide cases.
So that's kind of the trial before the trial.
Yeah, before a provincial court judge, and that provincial court judge, upon hearing the evidence, decides if there's enough evidence that a jury could possibly convict the accused at Superior Court. So you do that, and that's just almost as much work as an actual trial. And then months later, you get your actual trial down at the Superior Court. So literally, your investigation is 1/3 of that time. And I'd say the most amount of work comes after you close that cell door and after you've laid the charge. So, and then the investigations themselves, like I said, what you see on TV isn't that realistic when it comes to the long hours and the amount of work going on in the background. And one thing they always get wrong in TV series, as good as some of them are, like if you remember The Wire. which I thought was really, really good as far as the politics and the semantics of investigating drugs and homicide goes. But when was the last time you saw a homicide detective on a TV show sitting down and writing notes for hours on end? You just don't see
And
that.
that's part
It's
of
like,
what you had to do.
oh, that's a huge part of it, right? Any homicide case that you investigate, the very simplest one is still going to produce hundreds of pages of notes, and most of them produce thousands of pages of notes for one officer, especially the major case managers and the primary investigators. So that's, I think, the old adage of the paperwork. There's so much paperwork that there really literally is a lot of paperwork. There's politics within policing as well, and there's even politics within the homicide investigations.
Being a homicide detective is an odd career choice. It's lots of people grow up thinking they want to be a cop, but maybe not necessarily homicide detectives. But you write in the book about how your grandfather and his murder during the Holocaust was kind of the catalyst for you going into this career. Do you think you're still trying to solve that one?
Um, I mean, I was fortunate enough that my aunt back in Holland really spent her entire adult life pursuing the clues and the evidence, which brought us to a point in the late 70s, early 80s, where we had a pretty good idea of exactly what had happened to my grandfather. And even my uncle, who disappeared shortly after the war because the three kids, as I talk about in the book, were sent to different orphanages in Holland. And he wasn't found again by his sister, my aunt, until the 1970s. So she really did a lot of detective work on the case, and the Germans kept meticulous records. And once she had that prisoner number, the 27449 prisoner number, she could trace him through multiple concentration camps and ultimately to the gas chamber facility where he was murdered. So obviously, my mother lived with that her entire life. My sisters and myself, we still bear some of the intergenerational trauma. Although I don't want to use that as a crutch by any stretch, but it's something that will always dwell in our hearts. And I think that was a real motivation behind writing the book as well, and passing that on to future generations who I might not have the opportunity to sit down and chat with them about it.
You raised the issue of antisemitism inside the Toronto Police Service. How prevalent was it? Was it just part of the water you were swimming in while you were there? Was it the odd person? Talk to us a little bit about that.
I think it's part of the water of a society that we're all swimming in, and especially over the last 2.5, 3 years, where we're really seeing a lot of it rise to the surface, and a lot of these statistics where you become a little bit surprised almost about how prevalent anti-Semitism and Jew hatred is within society as a whole. And if you consider that the police service is supposed to be a reflection of that society, then if you look at the numbers of anti-Semites within society, you would expect to see the same thing within the organization. And I think the onus is on the leadership of the organization to make sure it's not tolerated, and that it's stamped out. And unfortunately, that just wasn't happening. So it's not so much about the people in the organization who are anti-Semites or Jew haters. The issue is the culture and the structure which allows those people to be promoted into positions where they can affect the police response to some of the anti-Semitic incidents that we see on the streets, and not only get promoted into those positions, but be protected in those positions. So,
Well,
and I
from the
really,
latest stats on, you're talking about anti-Semitism and Jew hatred. Let me just give you some stats that won't shock you, but should shock anyone else listening. 1% of Canadians. Jews make up 1% of Canadians. They are 71% of the hate incidents. Put another way, a Jewish Canadian is 20 times more likely to be a victim of a hate crime than any other Canadian.
Yeah, and, especially since the book came out, I've sat down and I've chatted and I've been in synagogues and talking with the Jewish community, online as well, and I'm sure you see it online too. They're scared. It's pretty sad when we see members of the Jewish community standing up and saying, "We're getting out of here." It's just become too dangerous. If you can't walk down the street in your own city at any given time of day without having to look over your shoulder and be fearful of being attacked because of your religion, then something's gone horribly wrong in our country. And unfortunately, the Jewish people have taken overwhelmingly the brunt of that, and that shouldn't be happening. And I think it's a lot of it is up to the police to protect them from that.
Do you think that when you experienced anti-Semitism within the force while you were working there, that perhaps you experienced it because to take a term from a different form of discrimination, you passed. People looked at you and they looked at your last name and well, he's not a Jew. I can just let rip. Do you think that was happening?
Yeah, I mean, very, very few people realized my background and my heritage in my life or within the police service. So I think people got too comfortable around me and openly made those comments, right? And other communities will experience this as well. And not until those comments got to the point where they were so vile, where I thought the person making those comments, who was in the ranks above me, was probably one of the most vile Jew haters I had seen. That I thought, wow, this should not be happening. This should not be happening in this organization. And um, if I was obviously of Jewish descent, I don't think those comments would ever have been made in front of me.
How do you feel the leadership at the Toronto Police Service has dealt with the rise in anti-Semitism that we've seen on the streets? They have just in past few days announced terrorism charges against one of the leaders that I used to see on a regular basis, um, leading people through the streets, glorifying Hamas, glorifying the leadership of Hamas, um, putting out all the chants that if you understand them, are clearly anti-Semitic. And so charge has been laid now, but for the most part, it's felt like free reign here in Toronto. How do you feel the leadership from Chief Demke, the mayor, other senior leadership within the police have dealt with this issue? Has it been good? Have they had no options? Has it been horrible?
I think it was abysmal. I think from October 7th, 2023 onwards for 2.5 years, it was absolutely abysmal. And in the spring of this year, it seemed something changed. I think Michael Kurtzner writing letters to the chief, essentially telling him to do his job, and the establishment of different units within the police service to respond to some of these incidents, the establishment of a security apparatus within the Jewish community, and then all of a sudden, in mid-April, you started seeing charges getting laid and arrests being made, and that should have been happening in, like I said, in October of 2023. I think we hit a really low point. Uh, at the Art Gallery of Ontario event, which you probably remember, where our then Prime Minister and the Prime Minister of Italy were attending a function, and they had to cancel it at the very last second because of the protesters. And I thought that should never, ever be happening in this city. So you see this fellow now who's been charged with these terrorism related offenses, and some of the offenses date back to 2024. And so there's been a real swing, I think, within the police service. I think they were getting some pretty poor legal advice uh, last year, and they even talked about getting that legal advice and exactly what that legal advice was. And my position is, I do a lot of media commentary, was legal advice is just that. It's legal advice. If it's if you don't agree with it, you can get a second opinion. And that obviously wasn't happening. So since then, they've certainly gotten some different lawyers on board, and we see a lot of work being done by organization led by Mark Sandler, who's just probably one of the best lawyers in the country, uh, called the Alliance of Canadians Combating Antisemitism, and they're working a lot of the behind the scenes actions, I think, with the police service, and we're starting to see results now. But I think they've dug themselves a very, very big hole, and that's on the leadership. That's on the leadership of the police service, and that's on the leadership of the city. And, you know, you especially mention Olivia Chow and the deputy mayor, Ozma Malik, and it's pretty clear the positions that they hold when it comes to the anti-Semitism and the issues in Gaza.
Well, we're always told that politicians can't direct police. And you mentioned earlier there's politics in policing. Any of us that have been around police investigations, police senior leadership, I've been around that in Montreal and Toronto and Ottawa. That's clearly not the case. And I don't believe that politicians never direct police. You know, we saw a massive show of force by the Toronto Police Service for a restaurant owner that had irritated John Tory during the COVID lockdowns. That doesn't happen just because. I think it's clear that politicians send messages or set tones. What's your experience? I know you were never at the chief level, but what's your experience? Do um, politicians, be it a mayor, premier, prime minister, um, send messages or set the tone for what the chief actually decides? Okay, we're gonna enforce this, or we're gonna back off on it. I think that early on, Chief Demkew got the message loud and clear from Mayor Chow, and so he took a very light touch with these protests.
Well, I think there's a couple of things in play there, and I think if you consider that the Police Services Board has 4 appointees from the mayor herself and 3 from the premier's office, and the chief briefs the mayor, or at least used to in the John Tory days, at 6:30 a.m. every single morning. And if you think there's no conversations going on about operational priorities, then you're sadly mistaken. And obviously, if the mayor is influencing the police services board with the 4 members, obviously the mayor is going to have some influence on the board itself. So you look at the amount of money that's gone to the police service over the last several years since Olivia Chow's been mayor, and everyone's, you know, very thankful, increasing the funding, but we're paying almost $1.5 billion a year for the police service, and the money definitely talks. And the other issue I think that we've seen in the past is the police chiefs who are looking ahead to political careers after their policing careers. And is that affecting their decisions as they run the police service? Are they pandering to their future voter base? I don't think that should be allowed to happen at all, right? We've seen a couple of Toronto police chiefs go on to MP positions. We saw another police chief make an attempt at mayor and a provincial seat. So that's concerning. I think if police chiefs are thinking that far ahead to their future careers, is it affecting the day-to-day decisions they're making in the operations of the police service? So, and I think the way around that, and I've talked about it many times, is we need to change the structure of the command of the police service. And that's been suggested in multiple reviews of police services
In
across.
what way would you change it?
I think you have to increase the civilianization of the command and the oversight and transparency of command. I don't think we should ever be in a position where one person, that being the chief, should be in control of that entire organization. And it shouldn't be so secretive, the day-to-day operations of that organization, that things can get buried and pushed under the carpet without anybody else knowing.
There was just a report out saying that crime is down, and of course, that's being used to, or will be used to say, well, see, we don't need to increase the police budget. Um, don't want to make this all about Toronto, but let's talk about, do we need more police on the ground? Brad Bradford's running for mayor in Toronto, and he says he wants to hire 1,000 new officers over 4 years. That would be an increase from the current plan. And so when I heard about that, I looked back. He made a comparison to 2010, said we have roughly the same number of sworn officers as 16 years ago. And I looked, and according to TPS's own data, it's within like 50 officers. And the population's gone from 2.6 million to 3.2. We've gone from 208 officers per 100,000 to 173. Have we just been saying, you know what, we don't need to worry about having more police officers? The police budget goes up every year, but that's because people get raises every year. Things happen every year. Things cost more. But we're not keeping up with the number of officers out there, at least not on a per capita basis.
No, and we shouldn't. That's our fault. Over the last 30 years, budget has always been an issue when it comes to policing. And like I said, the amount of money they're pouring into it now is welcome to see. And I'm always been a big proponent and a fan of more police officers. But when they're being effectively used within the city and being effectively trained and professional and transparent, because that's what's causing all the issues right now. So they're having a real hard time keeping up with their multi-year hiring plan, with retention of some of the officers and the amount of people retiring and leaving for other police services. To add 1,000 officers, I think you could double the size of the police service in Toronto, and it could be very, very effective in the city. The question is, what's the cost? How are we ensuring that they're being trained properly? How are we ensuring that we're not losing them to other police services? And how are we going to use these police officers that we have? So when you talk about crime stats, overall, compared to 15 years ago, they really are not down that much. These
Well,
things
I
come
would
in.
actually argue, because I've just looked at them, the community safety indicators where they combine assaults, break-in enters, robberies, etc. The it's down to 43,000 incidents in 2025 from 47,000 in 2024 and 49,000 in 23. But the 10-year average is 39,000. So it's still up. And
Exactly.
this is what York Regional Police have done recently, other police services. They're, oh, crime's down. Well, yeah, from an insane high, because I don't know what happened over the past few years. Crime was up everywhere dramatically, and now it's fallen a little bit, and people say, oh, see, mission accomplished.
Yeah, no, far from it. It comes in ebbs and flows, and right now it's at a bit of an ebb. Wait for that next flow, and I think you'll see it'll skyrocket again. And if you're talking about the difference between 49,000 incidents and 47,000 incidents, it'd be interesting to take a look at the margins of error. It'd be interesting to take a look at how they're compiling these statistics, the non-reporting of some incidents. I was part of a community group several months ago, and they were discussing issues within their neighborhood. And one lady played a clip of a fellow coming into her backyard and trying her back door. And she had video of it. And I said, did you report it to the police? And she said, well, no, why would I bother? What are they going to do with that? And I said, well, for all you know, 2 hours later, the same guy 2 blocks north got into somebody's house and committed a sexual assault. And the police are desperately looking for any video footage. So you just don't know. So you've got to report things like that. And several months ago, I was reading through one of the reports to the Police Services Board, and they talked about how robberies were down. Well, a robbery is essentially a theft with an assault, as you know. And I looked at the stats and I said, okay, robberies are down, but thefts are up and assaults are up. So what's going on here with those statistics, right? So
Yeah.
the difference between 47 and 49, I don't think is anything to rest on your laurels about whatsoever. And we've just got to keep up that fight and keep up the number of police officers and make it a better environment and culture for them to work in, so we're not losing them to other organizations.
All right, we need to take a break, and I want to get back to your book and more about your career as a homicide detective because it is fascinating, Hank. But we have a quick break first and a shameless plug because we've got merch, Post Media merch. You want a hoodie? You want a hat? Your favorite newspaper? Toronto Sun, National Post. You can find it all. It's a bold way to show your love for fearless journalism and look good too. Postmedia.store. Visit postmedia.store to shop the collection today.
You're a political junkie, right? I mean, that's why you're listening to this podcast.
But if you're not in the loop with Post Media's VIP political hack, then you're not getting even close to the whole politics story.
I'm Stuart Thompson, Parliamentary Bureau Chief.
And I'm political analyst Tasha Carradine.
We head up the team that brings Political Hack members the exclusive political intel that goes so much deeper than the news. With inside stories, sharp analysis, and behind-the-scenes scoops from Parliament Hill and beyond.
With our twice-weekly newsletters, exclusive reports from Washington, D.C., early access to John Ivison columns, and subscriber-only videos and events, Hack members get insider insight into the minds of the strategists, policy gurus, and power brokers shaping Canada's political future.
You don't want to miss all that, do you?
I sure don't. And you can get all now for less than $1 a week. Just go to nationalpost.com/newsletters to sign up.
That's nationalpost.com/newsletters.
So much is happening in politics right now. Rising tensions with the U.S. on trade and defense.
Not one, but two provincial separatist movements gaining real ground.
The Liberals trying to hang on to a razor-thin majority as the economy stumbles and with the cost of living still rising.
It's exciting.
Extremely exciting.
But the only way to get behind the scenes and right into the source code of what politicians and the people around them are really thinking is to get Political Hack.
Go to nationalpost.com/newsletters.
And join us.
This is Tristan Hopper, the host of Canada Did What?, where we unpack the biggest, weirdest, and wildest political moments in Canadian history you thought you knew and tell you what really happened. Stick around at the end of the episode to hear a sample of one of our favorite episodes from Season 2. And if you missed it, there are even more episodes from last season, so make sure you subscribe to Canada Did What? Everywhere.
The book
you
is
get
The High Road
podcasts.
Confessions of a Homicide Cop. Hank, you were involved in a couple of very high-profile homicides that caught national attention. We're talking about Jane Kriba's Boxing Day shooting, December 2005. Bruce MacArthur, the case which turned out to be a serial murder. Before we talk about the cases individually, though, tell me what it was like to be involved in such high-profile, media-intensive cases, because most homicides don't make the front page of the newspaper. They don't lead the local news, never mind the national news. What was it like being involved in such very high-profile cases?
Well, I spent 18 years in homicide, including 5 of my last years as the unit commander of homicide. And Jane Kriba, for instance, at the end of 2005, which was my first year in homicide, I was peripherally involved in that. The entire office got called out. It was Boxing Day. We still used an old pager system, and the boss just put out an all-page, anybody who's available, come in. So I happened to be one of the peripheral investigators on that the night it happened. So by working through some of the smaller profile cases and cutting your teeth with the small media scrums and the small press conferences, I think as a homicide investigator, you have to be comfortable in front of a TV camera. And I don't think you should be relying on the media relations officers to do your talking for you. I think that's doing a bit of a disservice to your victims. So it's not easy to get in front of the cameras. It takes a lot of practice, and you're going to screw up. You're especially going to screw up when you first start doing it. And I still get nervous getting in front of the cameras. I still get nervous jumping on podcasts. Uh,
You do
and
well.
Yeah, thank you. Uh, and really getting to that point after, 10, 15 years in homicide where you learn what you can say, what you can't say, and strategically what you should say to help further your investigation. Just comes with experience and knowledge. So I was very fortunate the last several years of my investigative stint to be involved in some pretty high profile cases and be able to handle the media and be able to get that public persona out there, which I got a lot of positive feedback from, not just from the media, but from the public itself. And that really has evolved into my post-policing career, which still heavily involves media and public speaking.
In terms of the Kriba case, most murders happen in the shadows. They don't happen in the public. Is the fact that this was maybe Canada's best known street, happened on Yonge Street, happened on Boxing Day because it's a young girl going out to try and, get some shopping deals with her friends. Is that why it caught the public imagination, the brazen nature of it as well?
I think that, and you know, I keep using it, but I try and avoid the term brazen. I mean, it's like calling these guys thugs. They love that, right? And I think really all of the above, young girl shopping with her family, Boxing Day, right in the heart of the city, right on Yonge Street, a world famous street. And you remember that got labeled as the year of the gun, and it already had been labeled the year of the gun because of the sheer number of murders and shootings that we had that year. So I think that particular murder, capping that off, is really what garnered the public's attention. And the subsequent investigation, which took months and months by Savas Kyriakou and Brian Borg and their team, coming to a successful conclusion in court, think that still attracts the interest of the public because we still hear about the parole hearings. We still hear about some of these guys getting rearrested once they're out for other offenses, and it always makes a headline because one of the accused in the Jane Kriba murder arrested again for this or that, right? So
Mhm.
I think the public will eternally be interested in that case for all of the above reasons.
Bruce MacArthur was definitely more of something that happened in the shadows. He was living quite openly and was a serial killer. Um, when the serial killer claim was raised, it was said, no, that's not the case. And I know there was a lot of political heat over that. But walk me through what happened. What changed? What was the clue that dropped that made everyone look at it differently and say, okay, there's something here?
Well, I think it was never looked at differently by the police and the investigators in the background. But that's something that the public doesn't see and isn't aware of what's going on. So I was pretty heavily involved in that investigation back in 2012, 2013. And I write about it in the book. And when I first became involved, we were aware of one missing person, and then we very quickly realized, well, hold on a second, we've got three missing persons, from the same area, and there's not a person in that project room who isn't thinking in the back of their head, could this be a serial killer? I mean, that's always on the table, but that's something you either have to be able to include or exclude in your investigation, and we just didn't have the evidence to include that in the investigation. So the criticism came in 2017 once the investigators had honed in on Bruce McArthur and had tied him to two of the missing individuals, and the police chief at the time was asked, "Is there a serial killer?" And he quite legally correctly said, "The evidence is telling us that's not the case right now." And could he have said something to the effect of, "But that's certainly something that we're looking into, the possibility of that"? He could have, but he didn't, and that's where the criticism really came in. But really, even in August, September of 2017, when we first started really digging at Bruce McArthur, the challenge amongst the investigative team is, are we going to end up with more murder charges than we had against Mark Moore, who, as you know, we charged with 4 murders back in 2010, and who was technically the first serial killer that I investigated. So not something that you can say publicly until you have the evidence, but as the investigation is ongoing, it's certainly something that's always being considered, and was considered as early as 2012.
You talked earlier about the paperwork and how much time that can take. Gathering of evidence. In the book, you talk about getting all this CCTV footage and trying to piece it together. How long does a process like that take? You're going on and on trying to piece together bits of video here, bits of video there. I mean, we're still seeing that with the Barry and Honey Sherman case. All we've got is some bad doorbell, video. How much you describe the grunt work that goes into something like that?
Well, if you take the Bruce McArthur case as a very good example of that, where his last victim, Andrew Kinsman, was killed at the end of June of 2017. And the investigators from 51 Division, because it started as a missing persons investigation, actually did a phenomenal job and just said, grab every video camera in this neighborhood for several blocks surrounding Andrew Kinsman's house and just preserve that video. So there's a massive amount of thousands of hours of video surveillance. And it wasn't until mid-August, so a month and a half later, where one of the officers reviewing the video said, "This red van circles the neighborhood twice, right around the time that Mr. Kinsman is last heard from." And that just shows you there's artificial intelligence is starting to help a little bit, but it's literally officers sitting behind a computer screen watching video, and you can't fast forward it. There's no way to go through it more quickly. So you're watching it hour for hour as it was captured, trying to find a little clue or a little piece of something. And
something that doesn't quite look correct, right?
Yeah, it's something that jumps out. So, and video surveillance, I mean, when I started in homicide, I had a case in 2006, which was a nightclub shooting. And the video for the time was actually very, very good. It was a multiplex system. I believe there are 9 cameras. And our incident actually takes place from the time the suspects first arrive to the time the murder happens, and then they leave, is an hour. And I was the one responsible for going through that video, and I spent about 5 weeks doing nothing but watching that video, trying to pick little things out, trying to find the clues in that video. So, and even then, 2 years later in court, I'm in the witness box playing through the video, and I noticed something else on the video that I hadn't seen during those 5 weeks. So it's very labor intensive. There is software available now where you can upload the video and say, okay, find me any footage of somebody wearing a red baseball cap, and it'll do that for you. Right?
It'll do that.
It'll do something like that, right? Or find me any video of a black Honda CRV driving along the street. It will do that for you, but few and far between where that can actually be utilized. And we launched a video analysis unit back in 2018. We got some additional provincial funding. And the chief of police at the time, Mark Saunders, came to me. I was the inspector in charge of homicide, and he said, "I've got this money. What do you want to do with it?" And I said, "I want a video analysis unit. I'm tired of going to the OPP and utilizing their professional video analysts to do the work for our cases." So that was the start of the video analysis unit, and they do some great work, and they're the ones who are on the forefront now of utilizing that AI to help make going through video a lot easier. Add into that, Brian, the body cams that all the police officers wear, and the issues with the video on those body cams, and the vetting of those body cams for disclosure in court, and the things that those body cams capture, mostly good, sometimes bad, about the actions of police officers. And you're adding that into every single case, every single homicide case, and the homicide squad has to do all that work to go through all that video footage as well.
You said captures mostly good, sometimes bad. I know some officers, some police associations weren't crazy about body cams. Now they love them because it more often than not helps. And, the idea that, well, the body cams will show how awful and corrupt all police officers are hasn't panned out. It's quite often showing the opposite. But it must be a gut punch to you, as someone that spent so much time on the force, to see something like the recent arrest of, what is it called, Project South? Several officers arrested, talk of corruption, talk of ties to criminal drug dealing gangs, and including all the way down to uh, the snowboarder, Ryan Wedding. Uh, like, how do officers like you, retired officers, or guys who are still on the force and are clean, how do you react to that without just wanting to scream?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing, that a good cop hates than seeing a bad cop. And obviously the corruption charges that we're seeing, corruption's a pretty broad term. But in this case, the corruption of those officers being involved, what they're allegedly involved in, it does really, really make you want to scream and hang your head. It's embarrassing for retired officers. It's embarrassing for current officers. The vast majority of police officers, and as we've said 1,000 times, are good, hardworking people with the right intentions. And my book, the dedication at the beginning is to the well-intentioned police officers in the city of Toronto. But there are police officers who are using their job for ill-gotten gains. And that should absolutely never be tolerated, and there should be more mechanisms in place to stop the abuse. We've seen it time and time again. Since the day I joined the job, the abuse of the databases, and now the leaking of information from those databases to criminal organizations. Surely we can do more to stem this and stop this. And we'll see where the Inspector General's review lands as far as recommendations for that. But it just makes you sick to your stomach when you see that going on with police officers. It makes the good police officers' jobs that much more difficult.
We'll end on this. We recently had shooting at a street festival in Toronto. And there are now calls to say we should have checkpoints at street festivals so that police can stop guys with guns from coming to the street festival. Is that realistic? Or are we just trying to police our way out of the fact that these guys went to the street festival looking for trouble and for each other?
We've got a big problem. And I don't think you can stand there on a weekend where there were 3 mass shootings and say it's a safe city and we have to put up with this. This is just what happens in a large city. Um,
Well, the one guy, so the yeah, the Salsa Street Festival gets all the attention, but what a lot of people don't realize is there was another shooting at a nightclub, Rebel, that same day later, and the guy who was charged with that was awaiting sentencing on a brutal, um, uh, what was it? He kidnapped somebody and brutally assaulted them. He's
yeah,
waiting sentencing, and he's out shooting people.
yeah, and the night before Salsa in St. Clair, there was a shooting up at Jane and Shepherd where a young man lost his life and 2 more people were injured by the gunfire. And like I said, technically that's a mass shooting as well. And you've got those 3 mass shootings, and the talk is we need to establish checkpoints. And sad that we have to even think about that, but consider what we're already doing, Brian, when it comes to some of these street festivals. And I see it when I go to these street festivals, and we now have these temporary vehicle mitigation blockades at the entrances to all these festivals. And I just look at those and I shake my head and I think how sad that we've gotten to this point where we have to do that. We have to protect the festival from somebody ramming their car through a bunch of pedestrians at a festival. And we saw this. You could even make an analogy between the Jane Kriba case in 2005. We can certainly make an analogy between the 2018 Danforth shootings and what happened here, 8 years later. And sorry, not 8 years later. It's 8 years later.
Yeah, 8 years.
And wonder, okay, what are we doing about this? And we can blame the Americans all we want for the illegal gun trade, but we're the ones who have created the market for those guns, right? The Americans wouldn't be smuggling guns up here, or Canadians wouldn't be smuggling guns up here if we didn't have the market for it. So I think we really have to quash that market. We have to make the repercussions for possession of firearms so severe that people simply don't want to carry firearms. They don't want to risk that charge. They don't want to go to jail. And that's where we have to focus the efforts, and we have to focus the efforts at the borders to stop them from coming over. And
That's going to be a tough
uh,
thing to do. I remember talking to former Ottawa Police Chief Chuck Bordelot about 8 years ago, and he was describing to me the rise in gun violence in Ottawa, which it's not as bad as Toronto, but it's worse than it used to be. And he said, due to things like fentanyl, he said the gangs that used to just settle things with a knife or a beating, they reach for their guns.
yeah,
Everyone's armed up.
everyone's armed up, and we didn't see that 35 years ago, when I was policing the streets of 14 Division, where if a gun was seized in the city of Toronto, all the police officers who were working, I remember I was working in 14 Division, and we got a guy with a gun. And police officers from Scarborough drove down to see it. They had never seen one on the street, right? So, and you look fast forward now to where the Toronto police are literally seizing about a dozen guns, crime guns, every single week on the streets of Toronto. So, do we close off access to these festivals with a checkpoint? I think there's other tools that we could use that would be a lot more effective without creating that fear amongst the legitimate festival goers. But I also look at what happened with FIFA over the last several weeks, where we had very few incidents because access to the Fan Fest and access to Exhibition Place were controlled. And certainly access to the stadium was controlled. So pretty sad that we have to live like that. But like I said, I think we've dug ourselves a pretty big hole from all aspects, from the actual punishment for possession of firearms to our parole system in corrections, and even the border situation with allowing these porous borders to allow these weapons to come in the first place.
All right, Hank, thanks for the time today, and thanks for the book and the stories. Encourage everyone to go out and grab a copy of The High Road: Confessions of a Homicide Cop.
Really appreciate it, Brian. Thanks for your time.
Full Comment is a post-media podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host. This episode was produced by Andre Prue. Theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libin is the executive producer. Make sure that you hit the subscribe button, share this on social media, and tell your friends about us. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, I'm Brian Lilly.
Here's that clip from Canada Did What? Season 2 that we promised for you.
In the wake of any major national tragedy, it's natural to start questioning how it could have been foreseen and prevented. But with the Air India bombing, it's the reverse. It's still hard to parse through the details of the plot and know that it wasn't prevented. I mentioned earlier that intelligence officials knew well ahead of time that Sikh extremists were trying to blow up an airplane. Well, what if I told you that it was even more specific than that? Air India believed they were the intended target and had even requested extra security for the specific aircraft that ended up blowing apart off the coast of Ireland. Rescuers were still pulling bodies out of the ocean when Canada's then Transport Minister, Don Mazankowski, had to admit that Air India Flight 182 had taken off from an airport that had extra police on hand for the explicit purpose of stopping any Air India planes from blowing up. Incredibly, luggage had actually been pulled off Air India Flight 182 due to fears it was a security risk. At virtually the exact moment that law enforcement was opening the bags under secure conditions, only to find they had saved the plane from harmless electronics like clothes irons and radios, the Emperor Kanishka was being blown up by the suitcase bomb they had missed.
They weren't supposed to check your bags in for a flight that you didn't have a confirmed reservation on, right? And that's what happened with 2 bags on June 22nd, 1985 at Vancouver Airport. So these guys who were checking them in were very persistent and, they got them through, right? They kind of hassled the agent right at the counter. Now, the other big thing was in both cases, the passenger who was listed on the manifest for the connecting flight, which were then Canadian Pacific Airlines, which people don't even know what it is anymore because it no longer exists. But both of the bags were checked into CP Air flights that were destined to land and connect with Air India flights. So it was, can imagine there were people that flew on the CP Air flight from Vancouver to Tokyo and from Vancouver to Toronto who learned afterwards they had a bomb on their plane. Can you imagine what that would do to you?
If you want to hear the rest of the story, make sure you subscribe to Canada Did What? Everywhere you get your podcasts.